It's kind of appropriate to be here because you remember our first stop, which was at Simon the tanner's house in Jaffa. And you remember how Simon Peter received a vision to go to Caesarea, where we are right now. So we've kind of gone full circle from our very first talk when you got off the plane. But I don't want to talk so much about that. I want to talk about something else that maybe the guides won't talk about. They'll talk about Herod the Great and all the architecture and so many interesting things in this Roman amphitheater and in this area. I want to talk about the Apostle Paul. Three very important things happened that we know in Apostle Paul's life here. You remember the time when Agabus the prophet came and took his belt and tied his hands and said, "You're going to be sent to prison." Yes. And he still went ahead. It happened right here in Caesarea. Wow. Second thing that happened in Paul's ministry, he spent, depending how you count it, between 5.5 to 6 years in prison. Wow. 2 out of those years were spent here in Caesarea, in prison. Why was he sent here to prison? It was to protect him from the religious leaders in Jerusalem. They were trying to kill him. In fact, they were beating him, and the Roman garrison sent 200 soldiers and escorted him here and kept him here in prison. The third thing that happened here is the Apostle Paul's journey to Rome began here. Remember, there was a centurion that went with him, and he went to Rome, and he appealed to Caesar, and he was there in imprisonment, and he wrote several of the epistles, and then we believe he was released and went on another missionary journey. So this place is, I think appropriately, for where we are in our tour, it has an attachment to Paul the Apostle. Now, Paul was a very religious Jew. You remember he said, "I don't take the back seat to anybody. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. I'm a Pharisee of the Pharisee. As far as my religion, I'm blameless. In other words, I'm top shelf." And he said, all of that, I counted as dung. He doesn't say, well, it's kind of good. It kept me on the narrow path, and it's okay. No, no. He said, that's a big minus. That's a big minus. That which was a plus to me has become my minus. It hasn't become a zero, it's become a minus. So he's really speaking radically. He says, the religion I had, all my observances, the ceremonies, the laws, are a minus, not a zero. But the plus is that I've discovered this new righteousness that is mine in Jesus Christ. And Paul never wavered. We love Simon Peter, and he really wavered. On the day of Pentecost, oh boy, did Simon Peter preach. He says, this is for all flesh. But then a couple of years later, when he was supposed to go and witness to one Italian, he was hesitant. Suddenly he wasn't so strong. I said, it's amazing what you say under the anointing. It's amazing what Simon Peter preached. But then, he was hesitant. And then we find him again in Antioch. He's hesitant. And Paul has to publicly rebuke him and Barnabas. So what made Paul this Jewish scholar? Because it doesn't make sense that the Jewish scholar Rabbi Shaul would be sent to the Gentiles, while the Apostle Peter, the somewhat rudimentary fisherman, he would be sent as the apostle to the scholarly people, to the Jews. If you were God, surely, but we're glad none of us are, we would have said, well, Peter will go to the Gentiles. They're kind of barbaric anyhow, and we'll send Paul to the Jews. But God does the opposite. I may know that God's wisdom is greater than ours. And why did Paul see the finished work of Jesus so beautifully? Here's how I describe it, and maybe you've heard me say this. There he is, full of murder and terror. He was really a terrorist, dragging women and children out of their homes, breathing murder. Whether he had actually murdered somebody, we don't know, but we know that he was there at the murder of Stephen. And possibly he could have stopped it, so it would make him responsible. So we have a man that everybody is afraid of. And he's on his road to Damascus, about 25 miles north of Caesarea Philippi, where we were yesterday. And he sees this great cloud of glory. Now remember, if he had been a fisherman, he may not have known what he's seen, but he's a theologian. So immediately he knows, I am seeing Shekinah. I am seeing God's glory. He knew about that, God's glory showing up. But then he looks and he says, I see a man in Shekinah. Impossible. He knew that's impossible. No man can stand in Shekinah and live. It's impossible. So in that moment, his entire theological world is shaken because it cannot be. No human can stand in Shekinah and live. So why am I seeing a man in the Shekinah? Hence he says, who are you, Lord? I mean, who are you? This is against everything I have believed in my whole life and what I fought for. And then comes the answer, I am Jesus whom you persecute. And at that moment, whether it took 1 minute or 5 minutes, to me it's like 10,000 pieces of a puzzle all fell into place. He's thinking, you mean you are the one that my friends in Jerusalem crucified? You're the one that we've been fighting against? You were sacrificed at the cross, and you are standing now in Shekinah. He's saying, I understand. I know all about the prophecies, the ritual, the ceremonies, the sacrifices. He said, this is it. If Jesus of Nazareth is standing in Shekinah and he was sacrificed on the cross, then all sacrifices are over. It is finished. There is no more sacrifice. There is no more rituals. It is finished. The Messiah has come. And he sees it like that, and he never wavers. And then he goes, and he teaches the other apostles. The Bible tells us he went to Jerusalem many years later and taught the other apostles. Doesn't make sense, does it? That a fellow who didn't even walk with Jesus, he would teach the others. And it says when he was finished teaching them, they didn't add one word. They didn't say like, oh, Paul, you forgot something here, They just said, yeah. Because he taught them the gospel. He says, I was taken to heaven, and I saw that the gospel is that when Jesus died, we died. When Jesus was buried, our sin and shame was buried, and when he rose, we rose with him. And so he really delivered the gospel. And so I think Peter speaks to us because he wavered, so if we ever waver, it gives us hope. But Paul is our man. He says it 40 times. He says, I'm the sent to the Gentiles. I have received this mystery. He doesn't even say we received it. He says, I received the revelation of this mystery that was hidden through the ages for you Gentiles. So Paul's our man. He revealed what really happened. And he was in prison right here in this place. And then he went on from this place with this passion. I want to share what I've seen. What I saw in the glory of God means that one is not an ordinary man. He is the Son of Man, and he's the Son of God. Because if he wasn't God, he couldn't stand in Shekinah. So when you look at all the other things here, all that Herod did and the marvels of the Romans, don't forget, our man, he was here in this place, all right?